1. Mayhem at the Maritime. Ramping up for some video production work in NYC, I'm Michigan-based. Our producer sent an email. How did we like the Maritime Hotel in the Meatpacking District? It looked a little goofy, maybe, with its round porthole windows and old-timey wood-paneled lobby. But why not? Before I could write back, an email from a coworker arrived. Is there any way we could not stay here? I have a thing about nautical stuff. Also clowns. And dolls. Cue my eye roll. And urge to buy a clown doll in a sailor suit. Our producer, unswayed by phobias, booked the rooms. Our first night, I experienced nothing remotely ghost-y. But sure enough, that coworker arrived on set looking traumatized. I heard kids whispering in my room last night. You're at the Maritime. Piped up a crew person. Whoa. That place is haunted. The frequent reports of hauntings at the Maritime are most often attributed to a period in the 80s, when, as Covenant House, it hosted wayward teens who were not particularly well treated. In 2011, the time of our stay, the hotel kept a big file of reports from guests, including one woman who ran out of her room shrieking, wrapped in a towel. A ghost had interrupted her shower. Next breakfast, Sailor Phobia waved her phone triumphantly in the air. Look, look. She'd taken a picture, her, facing the bathroom mirror, surrounded by steam. Everyone crowded around. I can see a face. A little girl, right? So creepy. I couldn't make out a damn thing. And I definitely wasn't going to report that I'd woken up in the middle of the night, having a hard time breathing. Something seemed to be sitting on my chest. A very weird and long minute later, a giant black cat jumped off me. I heard my door open, and a guy in the hallway, somehow I knew it was the janitor, started waving a child out of my room. I could feel the air as it ran past. Look, I'm sure it was just an oddly specific dream, fueled by too much wine and everybody's stories. And the Maritime is still there. When I search for it, it says, save big. Heart no. 2. Walking into The Shining. Sometimes, what you see in scary movies can resemble true horror travel stories, which is exactly what happened to me. When traveling to Banff to see the Canadian Rockies, my sister and I decided to stay at the Fairmont Banff Springs Hotel. The historic and famous luxury hotel opened in 1888, and looks like a beautiful haunted castle. I did some research online and learned that it indeed had a creepy haunted past. Some say that ghosts roam the halls, like a 1920s bride who tripped and fell down the stairs to her death. The biggest mystery is of the missing room 873. Every floor except floor 8 has a room ending with the number 73. Rumor has it that a man went crazy and murdered his wife and kids in this room. Apparently, the hotel boarded up the rooms since there were complaints from guests and staff of weird events occurring, like reappearing bloody handprints and violent screams in the middle of the night. However, today they say they combined it with room 875 to make it larger. As a lover of horror movies, I convinced my sister to go ghost hunting in the hotel. At night, we explored the different wings of the hotel and walked as far as we could up the stairs to the towers. When close to the very top, we found a small door underneath the stairs. We opened it and a dark storage closet appeared in front of us with tons of old floor lamps. We daringly decided to walk inside the room and used the flashlight of our phones to see if we could find anything else. As we walked in farther, we saw "Red Rum" and "Get Out" written in large letters across the back wall. We screamed and ran as fast as we could out of there. When back in our hotel room, we tried doing some research to see if there were any tied meanings to floor lamps and came across the term ghost light. A ghost light's practical use is to light up the dark stage of a theater when unoccupied. What freaked us out is that there are superstitions that ghost lights were placed to either appease or scare ghosts away. Needless to say, we didn't sleep very well that night. 3. A date with the headless drummer. A few years ago, I was on a study abroad term which was held in a 15th century medieval castle, Herstmonceux Castle, located in the south of England. Early on in our orientation, we got to learn all about the long history of the castle and grounds, including a few creepy details about beings you might encounter wandering about. The headless drummer, a former military man with a drum, was one of them. One night, a buddy and I were walking through a dark corridor of the castle from the library to the pub to meet our friends. Funny enough, the castle pub was named the Headless Drummer. As we walked the long, dimly lit corridor, we both froze at the same time. We thought we could hear something. Drumming. Snare drumming. Faintly tapping. But definitely, unmistakably drumming sounds. We looked at one another with wide eyes, half smiling in disbelief because there was absolutely no way we were both actually experiencing this at the same time, half panicked because we were both hearing what we were thinking we were hearing. I said to my friend, "Tell me you're hearing that, too." My buddy looked right back at me and said without a pause, "I swear I am hearing that, too." Our amused disbelief turned to sheer panic and we sprinted out of that corridor. A few twists and turns later we saw the lights of the pub and stumbled inside, half panting and half in shock. When we saw our friends sitting at a table, they said, "Whoa, you look like you've seen a ghost," to which we replied no, but we heard the drummer. We needed a few pints to calm our nerves that night and walked home with the large group just in case. 4. When a night in the campervan turns eerie. Here is one of our wildest short adventure stories. We go on a lot of adventures with our campervan, and most of the time, we'll park in places in the middle of nowhere. Usually, our nights are peaceful, cozy, and all fine. However, one night in a little village in northern France, just off the city of Nancy, we found a place near the start of a forest trail to sleep for the night. When we were half asleep, we heard weird thumping sounds outside, like there was somebody knocking. We thought maybe it was a robber, but we took a look through our window and there was no one in sight. At that point, we were a little scared but we brushed it off, thinking maybe it was just the wind howling on our campervan. After all, it's not the first time we've heard bizarre sounds outside when sleeping in random places in the wilderness. We decided to go back to sleep, but the pounding sounds started again. Completely freaked out at this point, we chose to just leave and head to the secure service parking nearby. The next morning, as we were buying bread in town for breakfast, we told the story to the baker and he told us there have been many creepy stories of spirits making themselves feel known in the forest. He suspected it was related to previous hiking accidents where hikers got lost or fell from the trail, only to be found weeks later. Hearing that, we were a bit relieved that we left and that nothing else happened. One thing's for sure. We will never return to that spot again after the experience, nor will we be hiking through those forest trails. 5. The woman with blood on her hands. In November of 2019, I was enjoying dinner at K. Paul's restaurant in New Orleans. Before diving into my dinner, I decided to use the restroom and felt lucky that it was so close to our table, as that meant that I could get back to my dinner quicker. Our family of 5 was seated on the second floor of the 2-story building. As I sat in the restroom, I remember vividly that there was a wide enough gap beneath my stall that I would be able to notice, and definitely hear, the main door to the small restroom opening. I didn't see it swing open, nor did I hear anyone exit the 2 stalls next to me. However, I did hear the sink begin blasting at full pressure. That sound caught my attention because I could have absolutely sworn that I was alone in that compact restroom. I walked out of my stall and went over to the double sink to wash my hands. A young woman with jet black hair and alluring makeup scrubbed her hands in a manic fashion next to me as I lathered my own. Every once in a while she would look over at me and grin in a way that made me uncomfortable. I'm a New Yorker. We mind our own business. It seemed odd that she would stare at me so intimately, but I tried to ignore her and not return the glance. My curiosity eventually got the best of me as I wondered why she was still washing her hands. When I looked over into her ceramic basin, I noticed a large gash on her palm that was bleeding profusely, turning the sink water ruby red as it ran off of her hand. The sight was so bloody that my breath froze in my throat. My boyfriend is scared of me now, you know. I broke a glass and he's scared of me now, she laughed as she said this, and continued giving me that odd grin. Her behavior was so unusual that I presumed she must have been very drunk and as a result was not really doing much of anything to actually help her wound. You should really put pressure on that, I said nonchalantly. She continued to stare at me with a Joker-sized smile and repeated her original sentiments. My boyfriend is scared of me. I broke the glass on accident. I nodded politely and left the restroom abruptly, feeling dizzy and now very disturbed. I relayed the story to my family at our dinner table, and we waited for the bizarre young woman to walk out of the door. None of us ever saw the restroom door open. I looked around the dining room throughout the course of our meal and never saw her face at any of the tables. There was a first-floor dining room, but she would have had to take an elevator and walk pretty far to use the restroom near us. This wouldn't have made much sense considering there were first-floor restrooms. I visited the bathroom once more before we left after dinner, but there was nobody in there. 6. The disappearing painting. In 2019, I was living by myself in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. I was 22 at the time and being alone in a foreign city as a young woman was scary by itself. However, the things I experienced during my time there were truly unexpected. I was working full-time and living in a hotel in the city center. The room had a small kitchen and felt more like a small apartment than a hotel room. Most of the other guests there only stayed for a few nights and as far as I could tell I was the only long-term guest. Everything was going smoothly for a few weeks until I began to notice some odd things. When I came back from work in the early evening, some things about my room would be different. Clothes I had left on the chair would suddenly be on the bed, or my shampoo bottle would no longer be in the shower but mysteriously moved to the kitchen counter. At first, I attributed it to housekeeping. However, I always placed the Do Not Disturb sign on my door when I left and only had them clean about once per week. Then one day I noticed something even stranger. The large painting that had always been hung above my bed had suddenly disappeared. In its place was just an empty wall. The hotel was quite new, so there was no reason to replace the painting. It was in perfect condition. 2 days later the painting had returned. It was the exact same as before. Unfortunately, I never got an explanation for what had happened. When I called the front desk to ask about the painting, they had no idea what I was talking about. 7. The Gentle Ghost at the INN Love True Scary Road Trip Stories. Here you go. We were on a road trip from Los Angeles to San Francisco and had a long drive ahead of us to Santa Barbara. The coastal views from the Pacific Highway were beautiful. As the sun began to set, we arrived at our destination and I couldn't imagine a more lovely bed and breakfast than the Simpson House Inn. However, I was not prepared for what would be the creepiest night of my life. I was booked in the Catherine McCormick room, which was richly decorated in burgundy, gold, blues, and green tones. I immediately recognized the Bradbury wallpaper. The bed was draped with crochet and lace linen. Like most Victorian homes in that era, the rooms were not en suite. My bathroom was located in the hall and had period features like a pull chain, wooden toilet, and stained glass window. We relaxed on the veranda and soaked in the expansive green lawns with carefully manicured landscaping. Gail, the innkeeper, served wine and hors d'oeuvres and explained the history of the house. We turned in for the night around 10 p.m. but I had trouble sleeping. I woke intermittently throughout the night and wondered about the time. It felt as if hours had passed. Exhausted and in a drowsy state of consciousness, I saw a very thin woman walk into my room. She looked so petite and frail. Her presence felt threatening, and as she sat on the bed beside me, she barely made a dent on the mattress. I was overcome with fear and panic. "Who are you? Why are you here? What do you want?" I was completely aware, but my body was frozen. As I laid on my back with arms at my sides and unable to defend myself, I waited for something dreadful to happen. In the most gentle and caring way, she pulled the crocheted throw blanket up and around my shoulders, and carefully tucked the linens around me. Her touch was so light. Within moments, peace swelled over me and the fear faded. I began to realize that she came to comfort me and make me feel at home. Then, I slipped into a state of unconsciousness. That morning when I awoke, my body was in the same position as when the woman visited. A chill ran through my body, but I felt refreshed and completely rested as if I had a full night of sleep. At breakfast, I described the experience to my friends and the innkeeper. My friends didn't believe me and thought I had a dream until Gail responded, "Oh, that was Emily." "Who?" My friends grew silent. "Emily, she used to live here." It was so eerie that an unwelcome ghost came to welcome me. 8. Voices from the Dark at Leap Castle. Deep in the Offaly countryside of Ireland is a rather innocuous-looking castle known as Leap Castle. However, this castle carries a rather unwelcome tag. It's Ireland's most haunted castle, and ranks as one of the world's most haunted too. It doesn't appear like a tourist attraction, and even as I approached it, I imagined it wasn't. A caretaker-like character invited me in to visit. This was no caretaker though, it's Sean Ryan, the man who calls this place home. Along with 50 ghosts, apparently. Sean was deeply knowledgeable on the castle, and after a riveting introduction, told me about the bloody chapel on the top floor. He then invited me to tour the upper levels of the castle. Alone. Armed with a torch, I climbed the dark spiral stairs to the room. It was here that brother slew brother many moons ago. The room was a shell, and open to the elements. It would come as no surprise to anyone that this was a place where something terrible had happened. It was tangible in the air. Yet that wasn't what lingers in the mind from my visit. As I returned downstairs, Sean and I struck up another conversation. Mid-sentence, a noise from the dark, like a voice, interrupted us. We both glanced in its direction, but there was nothing, and I turned nervously back to my host. Instead of giving an explanation, he continued with his story, without even a mention of what happened, as a man who was used to strange sounds in the dark wood. I never asked what it was. But I often do wonder, what was that noise I heard in the shadows of Ireland's infamous castle? Alas, I'll never know. 9. A scary night house-sitting in the mountains of Colorado. I was house-sitting in the mountains of Colorado by myself when I was awoken at 1 a.m. by the sound of someone, or something, walking loudly outside and dragging something that sounded like a chain. As time went on, it got louder and more frequent, and then I heard whatever this thing was starting to run. I rang 911 but I was way out in the mountains. It took 45 minutes for them to arrive, and during that time, whatever was making the noises outside was getting louder and closer. The cops finally arrived and did a perimeter inspection. They found something unusual outside and called me out to take a look at it. A long drag mark in the gravel that they couldn't explain. They also heard something moving away from them in the forest when they did a second walk around outside. They told me that it was probably a mountain lion, but that didn't explain the chain, or the fact that it sounded exactly like a human walking and running. Maybe mountain lions sound like that, but I wasn't convinced. The cops left around 4 a.m., and I didn't get any sleep until it started getting light out. I had trouble sleeping by myself for months after my experience, and I will never do such a secluded house sit by myself ever again. It's been 4 years, but I still remember the absolute fear I felt, and I'm afraid that one day I will hear the footsteps and dragging again, and then I would know for sure that it wasn't a mountain lion or a human, but something unexplained. That is my greatest fear of all. 10. We accidentally encountered a burial site on the Oregon coast. One day, my husband and I were hiking to an abandoned lighthouse on the Oregon coast. The dedicated viewpoint was too far away, and we didn't bring a telephoto lens, so we decided to follow a lightly used path up the cliffside for a closer view. Almost immediately, both of us felt like ghosts were following us. We were hiking in midday, but the trail had lots of sections that were enclosed in tunnels of bushes and trees, making it feel much darker than it actually was. Both of us felt pretty relieved when we came closer to the lighthouse. Here, there was a clearing where foundations of old buildings used to be. We got as close to the lighthouse as we could. Cape Arago Lighthouse is on an island just offshore called Chief Island, and the footbridge had been taken out, leaving no current access to the base of the building. After a short stint of photographing the lighthouse, we wanted to turn around and get out of the area ASAP. We both got weird chills and feelings that we were being followed, so we were surprised to discover an old man on the trail right behind us. He made a bit of small talk and talked about how much he loved the area. He then turned around to say goodbye, and walked straight into the forest and disappeared. Bertie and I were sure we would run into him on the way back to our car, but we never spotted him again. After this creepy outing, we learned that this dangerous section of the coast had seen many deaths and shipwrecks. The area was also the site of an old Native American village, where many members of the Confederated Tribes of Coos, Lower Umpqua, and Siuslaw Native Americans were buried among the trees and their ashes scattered. Our uneasy feelings were justified because it seems as if we were trespassing on sacred burial land. For us, this was a good reminder to learn about the history of the land we recreate on, and always respect the history of its people and culture when visiting.